Hi, can I have your attention, please? Very welcome to the last lecture of our 5-year anniversary event for Brännpunkt Europa. It is with Mr. Shahzad Akbar, and the title is Beyond Europe, Pakistan from Above and Below. And Brännpunkt Europa is a student-led organization here at the University of Gothenburg in cooperation with the Center of European Studies and the Center of European Research. We are student-led, and we organize seminars about topics relating to EU, Europe, or about EU. And today the theme is, as you can see, Pakistan from Above and Below with Mr. Shahzad Akbar. And before I hand over the word to him, I am going to introduce Sarah, who is responsible for this cooperation between the Hasselblad Foundation, Valand Academy, and Brännpunkt Europa here at the University of Gothenburg, Social Science Department. So please, welcome.
Thank you very much. Just to give some context as to the invitation to Shahzad Akbar. It's a profound honor to have Shahzad Akbar in Sweden. This is part of a larger project which is called Drone Vision, which is a collaboration between Valand Academy and the Hasselblad Foundation. This research project, which is over 2 years, is going to result in a triptych of exhibitions in May 2018, which will be between Hasselblad Foundation, Nicosia Municipal Arts Centre in Cyprus, and the National College of Arts in Lahore, which will be about photo-based artists responding to drones. It is, as I say, a really profound honour to have Shahzad Akbar here, who's both a barrister and an activist, and it's also very important that instead of having Europeans speaking about the other, that we actually invert our relationship and actually, as Europeans, spend some time actually listening to the consequences of a kind of political complacency. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me, and don't tell the Bar Council of England and Wales that I'm an activist as well, because they'll debar me for that, because they really love their rules. Thank you for all of you coming here and listening to me, because being educated in Britain, I know this is a very important pub time, so I'll try to make it as fun as possible and as short and brief as I could. I'll be talking about some serious subject, but we'll get over it soon. As I already said, I'm a lawyer, but practicing in Pakistan, not in Britain. I work in the human rights area. I represent 2 organizations. I'll just talk briefly about them. One is very well known, Reprieve, which is based in UK. It's an anti-death penalty organization which works across the globe. We oppose death penalty, but the real fame for the last 15 years is working against Guantanamo and representing inmates there. And some of people have come from Pakistan as well that we represent. The other organization is called Foundation for Fundamental Rights, which is a Pakistan-based organization which was set up to basically start working on drones and representing the civilian victims of drone strikes from Pakistan. And it works on many other issues relating to human rights in Pakistan. I personally feel that Foundation for Fundamental Rights is much more important organization than Reprieve, but that's an ongoing discussion we're having with my English colleagues. Now, Pakistan, probably like any other developing country and a former colony that we should not forget, is an interesting case study for human rights subjects. You name any violation of human rights and we have it there. And most of the time the perpetrator of such violation is no one else but our own government. And this is something that I realized that after being exposed to Europe, that governments could also be good. But generally in an authoritative setup, governments become the usurper of human rights. But the topic that I'm going to talk about is not the the other issues of violation of human rights, and there are plenty, and we can talk about them later. But the specific topic here is an issue which basically involves a violation of very basic fundamental right, and that is the right to life. And the mode in which it is done, the perpetrator actually never faces the victim. He's doing it remotely. And by not really doing anything that has been done in the past, he's doing it by just with a joystick, by sitting thousands and thousands of miles away. And that is drones. Now, to talk about drones, it's really interesting that to know what are the first things that come to your mind when you hear the word drone. Because the way drones are sold to most of the governments around the world, and it's not just the Western developed nations, it's also being sold now to the less developed but far more authoritative governments, like Pakistan, for example, as a weapon of precision, a smart weapon, which only kills the target. You can achieve your objective with minimum side effects, so to say. But let me tell you, and also the other important point is that it makes the decision-making process of going to war extremely easy. Because your own soldiers are never going to set foot on the ground, and you will be at war with some nation or some community without being there and not exposing your own soldiers to any harm, which in developed nations can be also a problematic thing for democratically elected governments, because you have the example of Vietnam in front of you. But I need to warn you that this is just the technological aspect and the technological side of the drone. There are two issues with drones you should understand very much in the beginning. One, the legality of drone strikes is a questionable area, because the legality has nothing to do with the technology. The legality depends upon each and a single strike. It does not mean that you can legalize a practice. It does not work like that. You have to see objective of each and single strike. So you cannot say every strike in Yemen is legal, and you cannot say every strike in Pakistan is legal. You have to see each and single strike separately and see who is the target and if they hit that threshold of being executed or not, because end of the day, it's basically killing. And I think they're just going haywire. Sorry. So that is something that has to be considered. Now, but when we talk about Pakistan, the real issue with drone strikes in Pakistan is the secrecy around it. Just to give you a background before I start with many slides that I have. The drone strikes in Pakistan started in 2004. But till 2012, they were called the alleged drone strike by the US, because they were never officially recognized as an operation done by the United States. Before they actually recognized the strikes itself, 300 strikes had been carried out, and thousands of people had been killed. So that was the level of secrecy around drones. And second thing about drones was that the identity of people, those who were killed, that was never known. It was never made public. So you would expect, for example, if government is taking such an extraordinary measure, be it any government, they would at least make public who has been killed and who is the target. But the problem with drones was that no one knew. Even CIA, which was carrying out drone strikes in Pakistan, did not know the identity of people who they were killing. So just imagine, how can we talk about the legality of it? According to one American well-known journalist, Jonathan Landay of McClatchy paper, he reviewed the drone strikes carried out in Pakistan between 2010 and 2011. Around 800 people were killed in these strikes. Only 6 people were known Al-Qaeda leaders of this time frame. Rest were, by CIA's own standard, was labeled as Afghans. That was the extent of identity known for killing someone. And also knowing that these people are threat enough for the national security of the United States and its allies in Afghanistan to kill them. So that was the level of secrecy around drones. Now, one big reason behind this secrecy is, it's not that the governments are evil, it's basically lack of intelligence. It's the unknown territory. You do not have ground intelligence. You do not have intercepts. Like, for example, in places where you have internet, you have all communication, electronic devices, they can be intercepted. Nothing of that sort exists in the place where I'm going to talk about, where the drone strikes were being carried out in northern western part of Pakistan, a place called Waziristan. To start with, there are no cell phones, because Pakistani government had shut down all the signals of cell phones. So how would you intercept? There are talks about ground intelligence or ground operatives, but who are these people? Because these people are, of course, paid intelligence operatives, and they're locals, because no one foreigner can be in that place. It's a quite close-knit community. So then you have to question their motives of spying, because would it not be easy for them to just spy on a random civilian than a high-level militant where he has actually some risk of retribution? Now, most of these things are some things from the past, because the drone strikes in Pakistan started in 2004. Now we are in 2017. Around 430 strikes have been carried out, in which thousands of people have been killed. But over the time, the reporting has become a bit more stable. In the beginning, there was no information, but then with some work on ground, with organizations who had some presence on ground, they increased or improved the reporting. So you got to know more about civilians and who is being killed. So there was a counter narrative being put. That actually helped. That brought down the number of strikes in Pakistan, because there was a close eye of independent journalists and human rights activists who were looking into who is being killed. So it was not so easy, but for a very long time, it just kept in the darkness. Now, just briefly, when talking about the number of civilians that had been killed, we're talking about a practice in Pakistan which carried out for almost 13 years. It has taken about 430 plus strikes, having killed around 4,000 people, out of which a higher number of people's identity is still unknown. And the number of civilians, not by our estimate, but independent investigative journalists like the Bureau of Investigative Journalists based in London, their estimate is over 1,000 civilians, and including 200 children. Having such kind of statistics gives you an idea that it's not a precise weapon. It really depends who you are using it against and what kind of intelligence that you have. But there's another interesting part with the drone strikes is basically the politics involved with drones. And that is something I really want to touch upon. The location of drone strikes is interesting, because it is happening in this part. I mean, this is northern part of Pakistan, but if you see this North Waziristan and South Waziristan, these are two tribal area agencies just next to Afghanistan, and it's basically kind of cut off from the rest of the country. It's in the northwestern part of Pakistan, and this is kind of a relic of our colonial past, because Pakistan had been a colony of Britain for over almost 200 years, I guess. I mean, you've been enslaved for so long, you forget how long you've been in the. So this was the part which was the tribal area. It's basically no man's land. Pakistani law is not applicable there. We do not have the judicial structures that we have in the rest of the country in place. And the reason behind that is that we're letting the tribes live in their own ways. That is problematic. When a foreign force comes in and starts violating their very basic fundamental right, they have no forum to go to. And that was the problem. So it was only happening, majority of it, in these two regions. Now, the constitutional status of FATA is that Pakistani law is not directly applicable, and they are governed under this colonial law called Frontiers Crime Regulation, which talks about communal punishment, which is actually the interesting bit. Now, the communal punishment is basically a concept under this law, which means, because it's all tribes. So it's one part of the country, there are small tribes, which form a big part of a big tribe. If a small tribe does anything wrong, so any individual in a small tribe does anything wrong against the state, then the whole tribe can be punished. And that is the ideology under which I think the drone strikes carried out in Pakistan in that area. Now, this was not the first time. We have a history of aerial bombing of the area. This quote, I'll just read it out because it's quite interesting. In warfare against savage tribes who do not conform to codes of civilized warfare, aerial bombardment is not necessarily limited to its methods or objectives by rules agreed upon in international law. This is exactly applicable on the drone strikes in Pakistan and Waziristan area. But this is not said by some American general. This is 19th century RAF manual, Royal Air Force. Because this is not the first time this area was bombarded. So there's a history of bombarding this area. So if you have any trouble against the state or the structure of the state, you just deal with it with dealing with them in this way because you think that that's not the solution. Now, the strike started in 2004 and there was an escalation by 2008, and that's also related with the political atmosphere in the country. We had a military ruler. There was hardly any opposition in 2004. You started with strikes, limited numbers. By 2008, we had the different issues going on in the country. There was a democratically elected government coming into power, but that government was being pushed into by the United States State Department. And there was a price to that. And that was the drone strikes. Because this quote, which says statements from weekly cables, it's a statement. Malik is our interior minister. He suggests we hold off to alleged predator strikes until after the Bajor operation, but PM brushed aside Rahman's, who is the interior minister, remarks and said, I don't care if they do it as long as they get the right people. We'll protest in the National Assembly and then ignore it. It's up to you if you trust WikiLeaks cables or not, but this is the kind of attitude we had towards the tribal people, even by our own government. Everyone knew and still knows it's an illegal thing, but the politics of it is such. And there's a reason for it. No political leader gave much attention to this because these people do not have the representation in our National Assembly. So they do not get to elect the Prime Minister. So it doesn't really matter. There's no, they're not stakeholders. Now, it also touches upon the issue of them being stakeholder or not, and then the whole terrorism cycle as well. Because this is leading from discontent to disconnect. Because if you're not getting justice, the whole point, look at the social contract theory. The whole point of giving away everything that we have as an inherent value of human being is that we'll get justice in return. And if you don't, then what is your stake in the state? So that kind of thing that you have a vacuum, that if a wrong is being committed to your citizen and there's no institution redressing that, so then you're not really a stakeholder in the institution of state itself. You have been kept on the periphery for centuries, and then an external force is committing an atrocity against your community and there is no redress available. So you're pushing the community to a side where they just have to resort to violence. So it was an extremely, I think, difficult situation we were putting the community in. Now, what I'm saying so far doesn't make any sense if I'm not talking about the people who have been affected. This guy here is Obama's first strike. I personally love Obama. He speaks so well. Every time he speaks, it makes me cry, honestly, because he's such a public orator. But when it comes to drone strikes, he was the worst person. Because he authorized more number of strikes than Bush. Out of 430 strikes, 400 strikes were authorized by President Obama himself. And before he left office, he started something new called Kill List. That every second Tuesday, he sits in a situation room and he approves the names of targeted people who needs to be killed. So I'm not sure if we need such kind of comments. But this strike is very first right after inauguration. When you do not have intelligence on ground, you end up killing people like Fahim that we have in this picture. He was a pre-engineering student. And you can see all of his family members were killed. And now it's actually almost proven that President Obama was informed right after that we hit the wrong house. The target was another house. So it killed all civilians. But till today, there's no apology, nothing, no compensation, no redress. This other person is quite interesting, Tariq Aziz. He was killed on 30th October 2011. He was 16 years of age. Before he was killed, 3 days before this, or 2 days before this, he was in Islamabad with me. In 2010 we started our work, and in 2011 we were actually training youth of Waziristan, because the problem in the beginning was that there was no reporting on the site. So, for human rights activists, it makes our job much easier if we have images. We can show you who was killed, what happened on the site and strike. But the problem was there was presence of militants, there was presence of military in the area. So there was so much violence that an independent person could not go on ground and actually do his investigative work. So we thought of a project where we got about 50 young people from Waziristan, and we wanted to train them to take pictures. And these cameras were actually GPS enabled, so that we can also say that this is not a Taliban propaganda. Actually, these pictures were taken from that specific site where the strike was. They got training in Islamabad with the help of some of our European and actually American partners, human rights activists. They go back, Tariq Aziz is killed 2 days after. The most horrific thing was when we raised this, and some of the Americans who were working with us, when they raised this with the US or CIA, the only comment they gave back to us was that he was not 16 years of age. He was older. So that was they never denied. And then you had this also issue that every now and then we will hear a big militant commander has been killed. And then we'll hear that this commander has been killed again. Then yet again. Then again. A couple of years ago, we did a report that how many times one person was killed. And one particular person was killed 23 times. And to kill about 46 people, 1,000 people were killed. Because those 1,000 were unnamed. But we tried to trace some of these names. So for example, Sadaullah, this boy who's sitting there, he lost both of his legs. 3 of his family members were killed. His strike was again one strike which said that one of the topmost leader, Al-Qaeda commander, Ilyas Kashmiri, was killed. He was killed again, and he was killed again. When we started investigating and we saw who that specific strike on 7 September 2009, it was actually Sadaullah, and he was one of the first victims who came out publicly and spoke about the thing. This is one of the pictures of this precise strike. You see, again, a lot of children have been killed. I'm a bit conscious of the time, so I just want to give you more time for questioning and answering. A lot of kids have been killed. Now, one interesting thing is that the missile is actually not that big. It's probably size of this table. And the idea that defense industry tries to give is that it's actually very specific and it doesn't kill. But one thing they do not consider is that most of the houses are actually mud houses. So even a small shrapnel can go into a neighboring house and kill a child. Because, depending on the weather, so in summer, for example, everyone sleeps in the open or on the roofs. So it's very easy to, this child is also one victim who was killed by a shrapnel. So, a lot of such images. And these are different strikes where one of the artists who we are showing his work tomorrow as well collected pictures of these children who were killed. These are out of these 200 plus children who have been killed in the strikes. Then, another interesting thing that we saw, that because it is being used as a form of communal punishment. Because the drones, one thing is that drones fly on a very visible height. Drones, technologically, they don't need to. They can be invisible. They can still do their surveillance by being invisible. They can even strike by being invisible, but that's not the case in Waziristan. They fly extremely low because they wanted to make their presence felt. And in doing so, they were also attacking different parts of daily life. So, for example, a funeral. This Karwan Manza in South Waziristan funeral killed 80 plus people. Why? Because this was a funeral where the CIA expected that a lot of militants are going to attend. Therefore, they strike a funeral, but funeral is a thing where almost everyone from the community attends. So it killed more than 80 civilians. This was the most problematic strike, 17th March 2011. Jirga is the Council of Elders in Tribal Society. This is what decides their disputes because they do not have any legal judicial forum. So any sort of dispute is resolved through this kind of mediation process. And this Jirga was on deciding a mining dispute. And 50 people were killed, including a large number of tribal elders. And for that society, tribal elders is extremely important figure. So this was the first time that actually the local community resolved to protesting. So the second picture is from Waziristan area, which is again something unheard of because there was no political movement in that area. The impression was that they actually don't believe in that political movement. They still want their own process. But this was actually changing because because right now the situation in 2017 is different. In the country we are having FATA reforms. FATA is the federal administered tribal area where they are being made a new province where they will have their own representative assembly, where they will have representation. The political parties have been allowed to have their own offices there, so now they are political parties and people can join political parties. We're still working on, actually we have a case filed in the High Court where we're filing them to have their own publications. They're not allowed to have their own publication. So, but I think drone was one important factor in bringing that political empowerment within the community because community realized by being cut off from the mainstream everything, they have suffered. Because when an external threat comes, our own governments do not represent or protect us. There were many problematic strikes, and this is all about the legal issues. For example, another pattern that we see that rescuers were also attacked. So the idea was, it's pretty much what the terrorists use. So in Afghanistan, I don't know if you read the news or not, that, or in Iraq as well, they will have an IED, which will be a small IED, which will blow up. And when a lot of civilians gather, there will be a second blast, which will kill more civilians. So CIA resorted to the same technique. So they'll do a strike in a particular area, and when people come to rescue, they will do another strike. And that will kill more people. And the idea would be, because we are killing suspected militants, so whoever comes to aid them is their ally, so we kill more militants. So, and this is something which the UN actually talked, and UN Special Rapporteurs actually called it war crimes, and that was. Now, I will just skip some of the slides. I mean, as we're talking tomorrow, important images and evidence is important because for a very long time in the beginning when we're doing the campaigning, we're talking about strikes, and the biggest criticism we got from the United States and CIA was that we're just making it up. Till we actually convince people to keep the missiles that hit their houses. Because people are extremely poor in that area, do bear that in mind. They were selling these. The wreckage, the very weapon which would kill them, they will sell that to get some medical help or food. So then we started collecting this evidence because this was important. Then we were able to sue the corporations which were making these weapons. Because interestingly, on these missile heads, you would have the serial numbers and the manufacturer and everything, so you can trace who is making this. In our campaign, we had a lot of success. So for example, 2017, there haven't been any strike in Pakistan. The number has increased in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Syria, but Pakistan, because of the campaign and the legal recourse that was adopted by civilians over the years, or maybe the change of geopolitical scenario, the strikes have gone down. We had successes. We won some cases in Pakistani courts which declared these things to be war crimes. Of course, US does not have to adhere to what our court says, but it has some sort of persuasive value, even if they don't admit it. We were able to file criminal charges against CIA officials, which was again 6 CIA station chiefs had to leave Pakistan because they were all named by civilian victims as respondents in criminal charges. So these were all successes. But one last thing before we start, before questioning. The biggest problem is, on one side, we are trying to build bridges. We're trying to convince people that humanity is same. There is not us and them. And NGOs and civil society organizations can be the ambassador of that message. But it does not work well when, for example, in 2016, 2 Western hostages that were being kept in the tribal areas, one was called Weinstein and second was Lipoto, one was American and second was Italian, they were killed in a drone strike by the Americans. They surveyed that house for 1 month and they could not see that there were 2 hostages in that house. There was a strike, both died. 1 month later, President Obama appeared in 2016 on TV and said, "We have mistakenly killed 2 civilians and I publicly apologize." This was a big thing. This was a big, big thing from American president, and that was great of him. But he never extended this courtesy to any Pakistani, Yemeni, or anyone else. But what was the worst thing? He ordered a couple of things. One, that there will be no more signature strikes, which means that they will not be killing people just by suspicion, or people who they think this is a bad area, bad neighborhood, just bomb the neighborhood and it will kill some bad guys. That we will discontinue. But for us, it was a success because for the last 10 years, we were talking about this practice and no one listened to us. Secondly, he announced investigation into the strikes, that why it happened. Thirdly, he announced compensation for the families. Both victims were paid $1 million each. Just imagine how much this money can do for the community, how many schools, hospitals it can build in Waziristan. But not even a single civilian victim has been paid a penny. And a lot of people, civilian victims actually, who were injured, they later on died because they don't have the money that they can afford. So this is the kind of message that it sends, a bad message. And I think that this is where we're losing. There's a report published by us, which is, I think, lying outside on the table. You guys are welcome to pick it up. And I will end here, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Do we have any questions?
It's working.
Yeah, Stefan was.
Yeah, so I thank you for your interesting and also very touching talk. Right at the beginning, you said that the legality of every drone strike needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case. Is there any case where this actually could be legal? I mean, as I understand it, that's nobody who is killed is actually convicted in a legal sense by a court or whatever institution. Usually it's alleged or like almost, sometimes maybe like almost sure, or sure in a non-legal sense that these persons are criminals or terrorists, whatever. But
So-
legally,
Yes, I got your question, and I think this is the question for which I have been thrown out of my public international classes several times, because I don't believe in public international law. But according to international law, yes, states can use force, lethal force. Many drone critics do not agree to that, but I do. But there are certain conditions for that. And in case of Pakistan strikes, I think that US is not, adhering to those conditions. So first of all, the drone strikes have to be seen in the context. So for example, in our neighborhood, neighboring country, Afghanistan, all drone strikes are legal. And then you have to work under the international human rights law in Afghanistan, because in Afghanistan, US and all the allied forces are working under UN Security Council resolution. There's a war. Pakistan is not at war with United States. It's actually an allied country. So there are two conditions. So for example, the case of Pakistan is different from Yemen. US is not at war with Yemen, but they're carrying out strikes in Yemen. In Yemen, the Yemeni government had invited the United States to carry out the strikes. So you have the consent. In case of Pakistan, the myth for many years was that there's a consent by Pakistani government, but it's secret consent. We filed a litigation in Pakistani High Court where we pushed the government to come out in public and say if there is consent or not. And they had to say in court if they do or not, and they had presented saying there's no consent. So that issue was resolved. So if there's no consent, then the only right available to the United States is the right to self-defense under international law. Now, under the right to self-defense, there's a threshold question, that the threat has to be imminent, and there's nothing else that could be done to eliminate that threat. So this threshold for each and every strike has to be satisfied by the United States if they take the defense of self-defense. Now we do not know, because the problem is, and many international jurists agree, the definition of imminence that US is given post 9/11 is extremely problematic. Because the traditional concept under international law of imminence is that you have a ticking bomb scenario. How many of you have seen 24, the wonderful American crime series? So you have Jack Bauer who's going and he's torturing someone to find out where the ticking bomb is. And some people would argue that under that circumstances, even torture becomes legitimate. So it's that kind of, it's a very bad example, by the way, but so that is the concept of imminence. Now, the American interpretation of imminence is someone in Waziristan thinking bad things about the United States, which they might do in future, which, by the way, they might not even have means to do against the United States. Because you can think of all the evil things, but if you do not have the right kind of things to do those things, then that threat is not imminent. But then United States interpretation is very different. But the problem we have is that we do not have a forum to challenge that. Because US does not adhere to the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, so there's no forum. And American courts do not, or have not in the past, I personally think, in post-Trump America, we have much better chance before American judiciary. But in past, few litigations that have been brought on the question of drones in the United States have failed because US does not recognize rights of individuals who are not American citizens, and especially in a situation where America is at war. So it's extremely political.
Other questions?
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much. I have two questions, but one is very basic, and that, is it U.S. primarily? Are they the only ones, more or less, who carry out drone attacks? That was the first question. And then my second, this photographic evidence that's presented of the victims and of the remains of the weapons, is that accepted as evidence, or does it tend to be questioned as a legitimate proof that something actually happened?
So the first question, so far, yes, it had. I really tried it if I could find any link between the Brits and the drone strikes, but we couldn't. In Pakistan, it was only Americans. There have been 3 strikes in recent history that Pakistan carried out. Drone strikes in Pakistan with a drone called Burak, which they manufactured with help of Chinese in Pakistan. But as we know from ground, that has turned out to be a disaster. Because to start with, Pakistan does not have the satellite capacity that US has, because the way the drone operates, because it has a real-time imagery being transmitted to the person who is operating it in Nevada somewhere. And that's only possible because of 2 things. One is the satellite on top, and second is a base in Germany, Ramstein. So with the whistleblowers that we now that this is how you have about a relay of about 3 to 4 seconds. So for example, the drone will be transmitting the image with a relay of 3 seconds, 4 seconds. So it's quite close accuracy. Pakistan did not have that. So it's basically, first way they had a drone which will take images and then it will bring back. And secondly, the drone which actually goes with the target coordinates and fires. So that was problematic. But to challenge that legally is extremely difficult, because they were only using it in an area which was called an military operational area. So then it's not a question about the usage of drone, because then it's using drones, F-16s, and all sorts of weaponry. So it then becomes just a weapon. The second question I've forgotten was about...
It was about how I'm not sure if this is what I'll speak loud. It was about how the photograph,
if they have been accepted. So, I mean, the thing is, like, there hasn't been a trial, really. I mean, we're still fighting the criminal charges right now, where Pakistani government is basically supporting the CIA, and they're trying to hold the criminal prosecution that you want to do of CIA officials, which is more symbolic, by the way. I'm not sure if we'll ever be able to do that, but the photographic evidence actually had much more impact in court of public perception, because in human rights work, that's what more matters. When we started the drone campaign, I was actually told by State Department as well that it's a problem of few people who are complaining about it, but the masses, the people on ground, they don't really care about drones, because in Pakistan you have so many issues. So it's not the foremost issue that concerns American to change their policy about. So the idea that we got, the campaigners, is that actually let's go back and work with court of public perception. And that's where this evidence really mattered, because these were not just images, these were also people that we took and rallied around, not just in Pakistan, but in European parliaments as well. So some of these people have visited and spoken with European parliaments, in the European Parliament, in German Parliament, in Netherlands Parliament, and British Parliament. And that actually had an impact, because 2 years ago, the European Parliament had a resolution for use of drones in non-conflict zones. And that was heavily influenced by the testimonies that was given by the civilian drone victims in the Parliament. So it really had an impact, but in terms of evidence, the thing is that till 2012, US did not recognize officially doing the strikes. So there was no conversation. So officially they will not have a conversation with you. And they will sometimes come out with objections like Tariq Aziz case, that he was not 16. So, which gives me as a lawyer the idea, okay, then you did kill him, but 16 or 18, we don't know, so we can figure it out, but you're admitting to killing.
All right, I'm just going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the EU relation to this, and also why US paid the victims that were German and Italian. Could that also have to do something with EU relations? I mean,
it's so the 2 things, so one thing is why we think Europe is very important. Europe is very important. That's some place where we can have the conversation. That there is that openness. I personally believe, and I've been able to convince people in Waziristan as well, that you have that kind of openness, that you can actually go. And every time that we visited European parliaments with the victims, there was this question asked, so what can we do for you? And every time the victims responded is that you can actually talk to Americans, because they don't talk to us. They don't listen to us what we're saying. Maybe you can talk, this is actually Obama's age, not Trump's age, so I don't know now. But you can actually talk to them. And the second issue was that couple of years ago, there was this big debate going on, or actually a year ago, about Eurodrone, because Europe also acquired drones. France used drones in Syria, in Libya, in other places. So it was more about if Europe is also going to use drones as it's one of its weapon of choice, you need to be better informed that under what circumstances that you're going to use it. Because in terms of having laws and regulations around drones, you don't have any, because the law does not recognize drones as a special weapon. It's one of the weapons, it's the use of force that it regulates. So that part is one. But the second thing about the compensation issue, I think it's not about Europe, it's more about the less powerful nations. Because it actually, see, the political price of having killed a European civilian versus having killed a Pakistani civilian is completely different. Because people in Europe would care and they will raise questions, and then you will have your government. The concept of government in our own setup is very different. I don't know there are a couple of South Asians sitting here.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to know the color of those bodies. I wonder if it is, I'm interested in complicating that, I suppose, and we've been speaking earlier, were those bodies white? And I think that going back to what you said about how Europe listens, I'm interested in expanding on why it listens. And it's a theory, it's an open-ended question. Is it because of the European guilt? Is it because of the history of the Holocaust that there is openness to sort of violence being perpetuated to others on that scale, where there is a desire to sort of still entertain a conversation around it, but not necessarily stop the sort of rollover effect of it? I wonder if those are the historical moments that sort of allows Europe to sort of still entertain the conversation.
I think in Europe what I've experienced, and especially I can talk more about Britain, is that their experience of, I think in Britain what really got me, like when I'm talking to people, the attention of people, is the Second World War bombing. They could somehow, people especially who were living at that time, they could relate to that and being exposed to war this closely. So that was one reason of that you're getting the attention of people. And then second is the core values of Europe. Openness and due process. Because there's a very different view about dealing with such issues in Europe and then in US. So I think that was one reason. I think that was a question.
Hello? Yeah, okay. As you might know, in Sweden we have a bit of a double standard. We are a neutral country, but we produce a lot of weaponry. And what about the drones? Do you know anything about the production of them? Are Sweden as a country part in the producing drones, or is any other European country part of that?
I'm not particularly sure about Sweden, but in Scandinavia there are different components of drones which are produced. For example, some Norwegian companies manufacture some of the components that go into drones, and there's a British company, Raytheon, which manufactures basically the brain of drones. And Germany also manufactures drones. So there are many European countries which are manufacturing drones. Actually, drone is a very basic technology. I mean, now you can buy it on Amazon. ISIS has drones. They actually have this drone suicide bombing. Basically, they tie some IEDs with the drones and they throw that on a crowd. So it's a very basic technology. And of course, Norway is manufacturing components, Britain is, and Germany is, but I'm not sure about Sweden.
Hi, so you called Waziristan, right? A no man's country, but also you referred to it as, or if I understood you correctly, it was Pakistan also. How come Pakistan is an ally with America and at the same time there's no reaction to this?
So it's a very deep Pakistani politics. So this is a tribal area. Pakistan is an allied country of United States because post 9/11, when US was legitimately hurt, it called out all the countries and said either you're with us or against us. And we have a very famous line by one of the undersecretaries of United States who called a military dictator at that time, and he said, either you are with us or against us. And even if you're neutral, you'll be considered against us, and we will bomb you to stone ages if you're not with us. So the Pakistan didn't have much choice. And the politics of Waziristan, as I said, like it's a place which is not just Waziristan. There are about 8 tribal agencies which are in terms of size as big as Sweden. They are tribal areas which are governed under a special law, and it has always been considered as a no-man land where Pakistani law is not directly applicable. And then you also have the disconnect with the rest of the country. So the urban centers would also be a bit disconnected with the area, also not knowing the area, the access of the area. And in terms of national identity, you always keep them out because they're on the periphery from the colonial times. So I think that kind of disconnect really worked out because, now we know that Bin Laden was killed in Pakistan in an urban city. Not a big city, but in a smaller city. So now we know that at the time of that Bin Laden operation, the discussion of drones came about. So rather than sending in Marines, we can just throw a bomb with drones and kill the guy. And that idea was immediately discarded because that will be considered a strike on Pakistan. So even Americans were very much clear, as Pakistanis are. In our psyche, 430 plus strikes in Waziristan were never considered as, attack on Pakistan. But one strike to kill even the most wanted man in Pakistan, in a city of Pakistan, will be considered by Pakistani population as a strike on Pakistan. So there's this kind of politics of the tribal areas involved.
They're pretty much alone if you declare war against them.
Yes, who is they? We declared war on them 2014. We did a military operation in North Waziristan. We did a military operation in 2004 in South Waziristan, trying to clear the area of the militants. By the way, the militants going back to history, Pakistan and United States put there ourselves. But anyways, we did military operation in 2014, and in 2017 we declared victory, and we have resettled the civilian population back in the country. It's a very complex political history.
Anybody else?
Yeah? Was there another question? You have to hurry.
No, I'm not.
Oh, we could go. Who was it? We have 1 minute.
I was just wondering because quite often what happens is when you try to mainstream a society which quite often is isolated, so then you have this tension of whether to mainstream them and thereby marginalizing them in some ways or the other. And on the other hand, if they remain on the periphery, they don't get the benefit of being in a state, quote unquote. So there is that tension. So I just want to understand from you how that tension has played out politically, both within Pakistan and this periphery.
I think in context of tribal areas in Pakistan, I think this was one understanding that we had for so long. That if you want to mainstream them, you are basically, turning them into a minority. So I think that is something that actually kept even that society out of the mainstreaming. But I have to say, by dealing with them for the last 8 or 9 years directly, and especially post 9/11, the realization of mainstreaming came from within. For example, for a person from a city center and foreign educated, I also had the idea of the area completely differently. I mean, for example, towards education, the general view is that they don't want education. They don't want their girls to be educated. But with dealing individuals, you realize that it's not that straightforward. They want to mainstream, but on their own terms. So we actually had a process of political dialogues for the last couple of years. And I think one smart thing that the same government who allowed the strikes tacitly was actually allowing the political parties to go in first. So those political parties actually created the space. And there was a consultation and dialogue process. And one good thing about tribal society is that unlike rest of South Asia, they're not that much class conscious. So in India and Pakistan, we have various levels of classes. But tribal society, there is one Malik, which is not hereditary. So Malik is the tribal elder. And he's not tribal elder because his father was. It's actually very democratic within, that the sub-tribe actually elects their elder because of his wisdom or experience or whatever. So in that sense, these people were included in the dialogue process. And now it has come to a stage where we're about to have a constitutional amendment to mainstream them. I mean, there are still questions around, because right now the issue is that we are going to annex them with the existing province or to make a new province. Now there are arguments in favor and against, and of course it's more political in a sense that some political parties who can foresee their influence in another state argue for a new state, and who actually are already ruling that state argue for inclusion in that state. So there's that kind of politics going on, but I think the important thing is the inclusivity of the people themselves. So in that sense, I think that is there. But having seen the drawbacks of being out of the state, everyone at least is now convinced that they have to be mainstreamed. They cannot really live on the periphery anymore. And the kind of atrocities they suffered first at the hands of militants, then the military, and then the drones. It's not just one thing I'm saying in isolation, it's it's a mixture of all that. That mostly has been because of being exclusive, being outside. So I think that realization was because of that, and now there's a strong movement to be mainstream.
Where's the mic? Do you have a question? No, I was thinking.
She just liked the mic.
Okay, I think actually we're gonna...
No, I turned it off, sorry.
For the live stream. All right, I think we're going to end the seminar on that very important note. And I would like to thank everybody. If you've been with us the entire seminar, it was amazing the entire afternoon. If you've been with us right now and asking important questions, we're very happy for that. But most and foremost, of course, we are very happy that for our guests. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I have to say one thing in the end. I always wanted to wear this thing, and it only happened in Scandinavia. So everywhere I speak, they give me this thing. It's like Stone Age.
Okay, I do the Stone Age thing now.